Recently, some friends of mine were talking about their favorite characters of all time. Unsurprisingly, I heard a lot of answers like this. And this.
Good morning!
And this. Nice characters, underdogs, people that you'd want to share a car ride with or a drink. And I get it. It's much easier to root for a character in a story that you'd want to root for in real life. But I've always been more drawn to characters like this. Or this. Or even this.
You know, you light one bitch on fire and everybody freaks out!
The reality is that not all stories demand a sympathetic hero. Some take place in a morally ambiguous universe. Others are about bad guys finding redemption. And sometimes good guys are, well, just boring.
This is what I am.
But how do you get the audience to root for someone who they'd never like in real life? Every story guru has their take, but I like the way that Robert McKee puts it best. You might know him as this guy.
Why the fuck are you wasting my 2 precious hours with your movie?
He says that the key to this problem is to stop worrying about likability or sympathy and instead focus on making a character empathetic. Or in other words, you have to find the humanity in a character and ask the question, how are they like me?
And by humanity, when I say a thing like that, I mean humanity is the universe of things.
So let's look at some examples to find out exactly what he means. We'll start with an easy one, and I promise, we'll get to the bad guy soon. Alien opens in space, in a seemingly empty ship, foreign territory for us. So what does Ridley Scott do to make the situation relatable? He shows us coffee cups strewn about and little toys decorating the workspace. We might not know what it's like to be in space, but we know what it's like to work a 9 to 5 and try to make the office feel like home. And that's the power of empathy. We can connect with characters without even seeing them. So let's try to put these ideas in action with some more unsavory characters. How about this guy? But let's rewind to when we first meet Tony.
Mr. Soprano?
He's in therapy, a vulnerable place for anybody, much less a gangster. And for many viewers, his problems feel familiar. His wife and daughter are fighting. His mother is stubbornly refusing to go to an elderly home.
It's not a nursing home. How many times do I gotta say this? It's a retirement community.
Even in his mob life, he has to deal with a new generation of workers who lack ethic.
Did you call, what's his name down at Triborough Towers about the Harlem contract?
I got home too late last night. I didn't want to wake the man up.
More than that, he's depressed and suffering from existential angst, believing that the best days are behind him. And then there's the ducks.
And listen, if you don't like that ramp, I'll build you another one. Maybe it's the wood.
Hey, kids, come here. Come here, they're trying to fly.
What we see is less a portrait of gangsterism and more one of middle-aged suburban malaise. That is, until 13 minutes in, when we return to this moment. And as the series goes on, Tony's gangster ways are always balanced by his vulnerable human qualities, his neuroticism, his crippling anxiety, just as each episode explores conflict in Tony's crime family, as well as his real one, balancing what's unfamiliar to viewers with what is. So we've seen how you can use vulnerability in framing to make a gangster feel human. So let's try another example. How about this guy?
You have part of my attention. You have the minimum amount. The rest of my attention is back at the offices of Facebook, where my colleagues and I are doing things that no one in this room, including and especially your clients, are intellectually or creatively capable of doing.
Mark Zuckerberg is infamous for stealing the idea of Facebook and for screwing his best friend out of the company. On top of that, he's also kinda awkward. So how does Aaron Sorkin make us connect with him? In the first scene, he has him get dumped. Another vulnerable start, but to be fair, Zuckerberg kinda deserves it. But just as important, we see what he wants.
You're obsessed with finals clubs.
To be important, to be cool. And what happens next? We follow Mark as he walks home. Now this might seem like a trivial detail, or just a good way of filling up a credit sequence, but it also provides important context for Zuck's desires. After all, he's not just anywhere, he's at Harvard, a place full of type A personalities who, like him, are all trying to be great. And in these wide shots where a lone schlubby Zuck is dwarfed by the historic buildings, he looks far from remarkable. He seems like an underdog, and so as the film goes on, we don't just see him as a money-grubbing jerk, but as a guy who just really wants to be cool. And haven't we all wanted that at some time? So we've shown how you can create empathy by starting a character in a familiar, vulnerable place, or by giving them relatable goals and letting their world color these desires. And in doing these things, we help strengthen that bond between audience and character. According to McKee, the logic of this bond works like this. The audience thinks, this character is like me, therefore I want him to have whatever it is he wants. because if I were in those circumstances, I'd want the same thing for myself. But let's test this idea further with an even harder example, something Hollywood often seems scared to do, the unlikable female protagonist. Woody Allen's underrated film Blue Jasmine begins with a sequence where Cate Blanchett's Jasmine gabs away to a woman next to her on a flight, immediately revealing her vapidity, entitlement, and arrogance. And it gets worse. Jasmine then follows the poor passenger, somehow becoming more horrible with each passing second. And by the time the poor woman escapes her, we too are getting tired of Jasmine.
Who's that woman you were talking to?
I was sitting next to her on the plane. She was talking to herself. I thought she said something to me. I said, what? But she couldn't stop babbling about her life.
But just when that audience bond is beginning to break, Allen does a couple smart things. First, he shows that the gouty Jasmine is staying with her working-class sister, putting her in an uncomfortable situation. And then around minute 10, Allen does something more unconventional, a flashback.
So what do you think?
I love it.
This serves a couple uses. One, it shows us exactly how far Jasmine's fallen. This informs her current actions. Two, we see Jasmine being sweet and loving, showing us she's capable of human emotion. And three, it establishes what she wants. Jasmine's old world was a fantasy, and she seems determined to keep pretending it exists.
This song was playing when Hal and I first met. This song was playing when we first met. You know it?
In doing this, Allen buys some latitude from the audience, allowing Jasmine to keep acting like this.
Would you stop staring at my luggage? Yes, it's Louis Vuitton.
Without breaking the audience bond. So let's look at one last example to see if we can add to our toolbox. I think you all probably know this guy.
You talking to me?
So what's familiar about Travis Bickle? At first glance, very little. He drinks during the day, hangs out in a porn theater, and he's more than a little bit racist. Travis is, simply put, an unpleasant weirdo. But when we look closer, we begin to understand why. We first see Travis walking out of the smoke, identified by his bomber jacket. A drum beat sounds and he stands at attention, ready for a new type of enlistment. It's soon clear that Travis is a Vietnam veteran, and though we never see the jungle or hear a gunshot, anyone familiar with the war understands that he's been through a lot. Just as Jasmine's backstory is key to understanding her desires, so is true for Travis. And what does Travis desperately want? Connection. Travis is lonely, and while we don't know exactly what happened to him, we know his war experience likely led to this isolation. And because of this knowledge, we're somehow not repulsed as Travis instigates stalkery relationships with first a campaign worker, and then later a 13-year-old hooker. One way that writer Paul Schrader achieves this is by using a voiceover of Travis's diary entries, helping to ensure that Travis's creepy actions are always viewed through a surprisingly innocent lens. So now we've seen a number of ways to create empathy for a protagonist. You can make the unfamiliar feel familiar by focusing on relatable aspects of their lives. You can start them in a vulnerable place. You can give them a relatable goal and use their world to provide context for their actions and desires. You can use backstory, flashbacks, or voiceovers to reveal relatable aspects of the character that might otherwise be invisible. But if you only take one thing away from this essay, make it this.
We all are born with a certain package. We are who we are. Where we were born, who we were born as, how we were raised. We're kind of stuck inside that person. And the purpose of civilization and growth is to be able to reach out and empathize a little bit with other people. And for me, the movies are like a machine that generates empathy. It lets you understand a little bit more about different hopes, aspirations, dreams, and fears. It helps us to identify with the people who are sharing this journey with us.
And when that machine works right, something magical happens. We're brought together in the darkness by our shared humanity, even if it's for only 2 hours. Truffaut once said that the most beautiful thing he ever saw in a theater was when he went to the front and turned around. So with that in mind, I leave you with this.